if I can do it, trust me, anybody can do it. I was no, seriously, I'm this shit
There's the
kicker from the west,
humbleness.
from the working suburbs of Melbourne, and the idea that I could get from that place, from what I saw as this unreachable goal, and just work at doing it, just because I had no choice. I felt I had no choice. I just had to do it, and if I can do it, anybody could do it, really.
Hello and welcome to the Art Department Podcast, episode 42 this week with Emmanuel Shiu in San Francisco and myself, Jan Urschel, in Singapore. Today we have a special guest. We have Wayne Haag, and he's talking to us out of Australia, out of all places. And maybe some of you already know his name. He has a long career in Hollywood and also working on various movies out of Australia. So I think he has a lot of interesting things to tell us in this week's episode. So without further ado, Wayne, why don't you give us a little bit of a background into where you came from and how you ended up doing what you do? And I mean, we can already see this amazing painting in the background there.
Thanks, Jan. Thanks, Emmanuel. Thanks for having me on. Really appreciate that. It's a good show, good podcast you guys have got here. My background, well, photography. That seems to be one of the common things I kind of like about you guys, is that I was into photography. That was where I started. I remember having a camera when I was 6 years old and photographing, a lizard in an enclosure in the zoo, and wondered why the shot when I finally got back, it wasn't what I saw, So I was always intrigued by this camera, the thing in front of me, and how it was interpreting that stuff. But so that's where it kind of began. So as early as age 6. And I've always had a camera in my hand. I always loved photography. And for me, it was about then discovering Star Wars, of course, in 77, and seeing that, and then discovering what matte paintings are. And then how do I do that? How do I get into that? I want to do that. And I thought it was all photographic. I thought these places were, because it was film, right? So they had cameras and it was all about photography. So, I'd set up my little C-3PO plastic model and the Millennium Falcon and all that stuff. And I just photograph it. And I'd always trying to figure out, how can I composite? How can I get the Falcon in front of a planet? Or how can I get, spaceships into the X-Wing models in front of something else? And that's when I started to look into using a 35mm camera with a slide copier and compositing using what I didn't know at the time was litho film. And I had invented this whole system in my head and wrote this document when I was in year 9 in secondary school about how to composite images using a slide copier and 35mm film. This here, I'm not sure if you can see it, is a pin registration system that I eventually made. I'm fast forwarding now many years, but this is a pin registration system that I made that holds a 4x5 inch piece of film, and I was managed to composite on 4x5 inch. Within about 2 or 3 years of making this, I discovered Photoshop. So that whole photochemical compositing process just went right out the door. But it's why I understood Photoshop really well, because I was dealing with and using litho film as a masking process. So you've got clear, black, clear, that sort of thing as a mask. So when I saw Photoshop, I was like, oh, I get this. This is really cool. And for those watching, this is how old I am. Oh, I learned Photoshop on version 1.6.
Wow, okay.
Not CS 1.6, but 1.6. One undo, no layers, and a mouse.
Jesus Christ, that's amazing. So
I say that often.
No, that's something to brag about, I think. So you were quite crafty and you really wanted to get to the bottom of this. And so where did it go from Photoshop 1.6?
Before Photoshop 1.6, I was lousy at school. I can relate to what Emmanuel was saying about being a lousy student, and happened to go.
I never said that.
And happened to go to a school that was actually like a media studies biased school. They had like a TV studio set up and all that kind of stuff. So I was kind of fortunate in that was a little bit surrounded by that. Anyway, my dad was like, you're not going to be an artist. Forget it. You're going to cut your ear off to be famous. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Who would cut their ear off? That never made sense. Give credit to the silly old bastard. And he knew something about art that I didn't, He says, so you've got to go get a trade. And I went and did electronics for 6.5 years before I started my degree in photography. And it was once I got into my degree and did my final year portfolio that's where I was dived heavily into Photoshop and 3D actually as well.
But was there still a
while
focus
studying?
Yeah, sorry,
go ahead.
No, I was just wondering, was this goal oriented towards saying I want to work in the movie business, or was it just hey, photography is the next best thing? Or
it was sort of a bit of both. I always had that love of photography, but in the back of my mind, it was photography. It would be a road into film, and the more and more I learned about matte painting, and the more and more I saw it, I wanted to do that. Because I was reading Cinefex from way back, so I could start to see the encroachment of digital, and how that might eventually become the tool for matte painting. So I guess it was a perfect storm. Things all sort of came together at that time, and my photography knowledge, knowing Photoshop, creating the portfolio I did in 94. I took that to SIGGRAPH in 95, and I got work with Digital Domain under the guise of what do they call the new media department at the time. They were going to get into games and so on. And they said, oh, we're going to do this big science fiction game and your work would be great for that. I was like, awesome, fantastic. Yes. I said yes. They offered me some money and I just said yes. I didn't even care about how much it was. I just said yes. So I had to go back to Australia. I waited 9.5 months for the immigration and the paperwork to go through. And then I went back to LA and started work at Digital Domain. The big science fiction game that they talked about didn't exist. So the Monday morning I walk in, they go, some of the guys that were already there, hey, you're the new guy from Australia. I said, yeah, that's right. And they said, that game doesn't exist, dude. It's not real. I'm like, you shitting me? What? I was like, I sold everything I owned. Everything was just I came to America, man. This is what's going on. Anyway, so that was Monday. Tuesday, I'm walking past the cubicle of this dude, and he's reading Mobius, the Incal. And he's got his back to me, so I can see the book. I can see what he's reading. And I've read that graphic novel 1,000 times, so I know all the panels. And there's a panel where these two pyramids, are joining, point to there's this beam of light or something, where just before it becomes the Incal. And I walk past and I see his book open. I went, that's the Incal. And he turned around and he said, yeah, that's right. Yeah, this is from this, dude named Mobius. I said, yeah, that's one of my favorite graphic novels. And he picks up on my accent. He says, hey, who are you? And I said, hey, I'm Wayne. I'm from Australia, blah, blah, blah. And he says, yeah, we're making a movie based on this guy's stuff. I'm like, are you serious? And he says, yeah, so what are you doing here? And I said, well, I just got hired by the games department, but they just stiffed me because there was some big science fiction game and it doesn't exist. And I said, and now I've got the choice to work on 3 of these other dodgy games that they were working on. And I said, but I really want to be a matte painter. And he said, well, we're looking for matte painters.
Okay.
And I said, just wait 1 second. And I ran off and I had my folio, which was, where are they? 35mm mounted slides on black card. That was my folio at the time. So I ran off and I got those.
Purely photography, no? That was purely photography, or was it?
Oh, no, it was photography. I photographed models. I had some 3D Photoshop composite and then recorded to 35mm film.
Right.
And I mounted to those cards. So I ran off to my cubicle and got my portfolio.
The Incal,
there you
that's
go.
what you're talking about. Yeah.
That's the one. Yeah. So I bring him back and he's looking at them and he's got a loop and he's like, wow, these are really good. Yeah, cool. Yeah, awesome. By Thursday, I was transferred out of the games department and into the film department, and I was working on The Fifth Element.
Wow. Okay, that's.
So that
talking about being there at the right time,
but in the right place. That picture in that book was kind of like that moment that those two pyramids and the light and they're like, oh,
in your head.
Perfect. Seriously, everything came to that point, to that moment in my life. It was just, it's never happened since. Everything's been
Come on. Yeah. No, but I know what you
it's
mean.
been
Yeah.
downhill the whole way.
Oh my
The
god.
first job I did after the fifth, or not after the fifth album, but after I came back to Australia, was a dog food commercial.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
you know,
That's quite a change of pace. I mean, was the contract over with digital domain, or did you have to go back for personal reasons, or?
yeah, I had to go back. My grandmother was had cancer,
Oh,
so
okay.
I wanted to go back and spend what time I could with her before she
Mm.
passed on. And I thought I would go back. I thought I would, just, but it never happened. I ended up in a small company in Melbourne and just worked on TV commercials and stuff like that. And then from there, I went to Sydney and I worked on the first season of Farscape TV series.
Yay. I'm a big fan of that. Okay.
Yeah.
Can
So I
you
was on that for about a year and a half.
Okay. But that
then,
was, I guess, quite different, no? I mean, just to be, I'm going to ask my Farscape questions maybe now because, I mean, I'm a big fan of the show, but it must have been quite a change of pace for you because, I mean, was it an American Australian co-production or something like that?
Yeah, Jim Henson Productions.
Right.
With Jim Henson Productions, but just filmed in Australia. I'm not sure what the production companies here were.
So was it quite similar in terms of like what you had to do, or was it because of the budget quite a bit smaller in scale? Or
Yeah, smaller. On the Fifth Element, I think there was a total of 265 visual effects shots in that film, which is like that's nothing compared to today's films. Yeah. It's crazy. And we had what? 8 months, 9 months, 10 months or something it would have been about 8 months. 8 months to work on that. It was cruisy. It was so cruisy. Digital Domain let me learn Alias Power Animator. I was, learning to build a car, one of the flying cars, and I never finished it. And they were like, okay, you've had your fun for 2 weeks. Now, let's get back to some painting, whatever. Yeah. So they were really generous. And there was tons of time to do stuff like that. It was just creative, and we had plenty of time. You could explore the work, you could get into it. Not like now.
So TV was it a difference mainly because it was a TV show with a different kind of pace, or
comparatively speaking, it was, I guess, still pretty cruisy compared to today's standards. But yes, there was several shots per episode. We had all the episodes to do. I was one of 2 matte painters. The VFX supervisor was a matte painter as well. So we kind of interleaved the shows that we worked on, sort of stuff. I tried to do, and I don't know whether we succeeded, but back in the day, Star Trek and Next Gen and all these shows, you saw the Klingon homeworld or some matte painting, and then they reused it and they just graded it day for night.
Yeah.
The same matte painting over and over and over again. We tried not to do that with Farscape, at least the first season anyway. I don't know about the subsequent seasons, but that was my goal, was not to repeat a matte painting, to do something, even if it's a different point of view, just anything that was different, which I think I succeeded to some degree with that.
Interesting. Yeah. But anyway, I don't want to interject too much here. Please go ahead. Okay. Please go ahead. Yeah, so after Farscape, then
after Farscape, I went back to Melbourne for a year and worked on a project with a friend, and then from there I went to Weta for almost 2 years and worked on the first 2 Lord of the Rings films.
Oh, okay, great.
As a matte painter.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. Mark Stetson, who was the VFX soup on Fifth Element, was the VFX soup on Lord of the Rings.
Ah, okay.
Before he got asked to leave by Peter Jackson.
Okay.
We're talking the guy that was the lead model maker of Blade Runner. Right. Mark Stetson is one of those guys you go, he's one of those greats, If you've ever met him, he's an awesome dude. Just,
need to get him on the show.
Oh, if you could get him, and he's like, what he's forgotten, where people are still trying to catch up on, I guess. He's just one of those old school artisan model makers, film guys, that era, which is why I'm so fortunate that I got to work on the Fifth Element with a bunch of those dudes, because there was the last of that old school, what I'll call the artisan approach to filmmaking, as opposed to this sort of technical, programming approach, code-driven approach to stuff.
As far as I remember, in the Fifth Element, it was still on matte painting on glass.
Nope.
No, it was already digital.
They were going to do one, and then they decided not to because I think it was going to cost too much. Fortunately for
that
me,
was, and that was your first full-on matte painting gig, right?
that was my first film gig, period.
Yeah, because I actually want to, I don't know if you want to go through the whole thing and then we come back to certain interesting things, or you want to ask, because I actually want to know how was that, because you didn't really know Photoshop.
I knew Photoshop reasonably well.
Okay.
Reasonably well. And I was lucky to have the only version of Photoshop, which I think was version 4, which ran on SGI. It was the only copy in-house at the time. They had Macs. Some of the other guys in the other departments had Macs to use. So I could have used one of those. And I actually suggested, just give me a Mac. It'll be fine. And they said, no. We want you to, use the SGI. And the very first shot I ever worked on was painting out a fireman. You know that scene where Bruce Willis dives off that balcony in Floston Paradise, and there's this ginormous explosion. But there was guys everywhere with little, fire extinguishers on the stairway here and there, and they had to all be painted out. So I painted one of those dudes out using Matador.
Oh God, I haven't heard that name in a while.
Yeah, pig of a bloody software. I was like, oh my God, this is painful. You want me to matte paint with this? No way. So I suggested Photoshop, and the guy who was working with next to me, he had his own copy. So he gave it to DD to install, and they said, all right, you get to use that. So, and they gave me this little 5x4-inch, Wacom tablet at the time. And I was like, oh, it's okay, don't worry. I said, I've been using a mouse. I don't need. They're like, what, you idiot? And once I got it and used it, I was like, oh my God, you can use a pen. This is unbelievable.
Because I'm curious, because where's the connection between, obviously you're matte painting at that time, and it's still, this is like before Google, so a lot of the references are, that if you had references, it would be scanned in. But
books.
did you know how to paint already, or?
Nope. So I knew how to composite, which is what I'd been using Photoshop for, essentially, with a little sort of painting, but I didn't really know how to paint. And on the, the floating Thai restaurant shot, you got that great shot. You got the miniature buildings in the foreground, and you got the matte painting in the background. The 3D, that was sort of roughly blocked in 3D. And then Kevin Mack, who was a senior in the company at the time, total genius, by the way, they put me under him. They said, Kevin, you got to guide this guy and sort of help him, So he was the one I was working with for the 2 big matte paintings. Anyway, so I'm like cutting out bits and pieces of architecture from scans and whatnot and putting this thing together. And my mate next to me says, what are you doing? And I went, blocking in. And he said, dude, I don't think you really know what you're doing, do you? And I said, no, not really. I said, I've never matte painted anything before in my life. So he says, maybe you should go talk to Kevin. I said, yeah, I think it's a good idea because I'm struggling here. So I go off and sit with Kevin, and I just happened to walk in while he was painting something himself. And so I just sat there and I just watched for the rest of the day. And I was like, oh, that's how that works. Wow, that's cool. And I just kept watching Kevin, just kept watching what he was doing and how it was working. So I was like, all right, cool. And then what he'd do is he'd just say, right, here's a bunch of stuff. Now you go from there. You take it over from there and you do this. And then there was a certain point where he just said, finish the painting off. It's all yours. Just take over. Because he had other things to do. So by then I kind of started to understand what that meant. I still had to learn a lot. I'm still learning a lot, but that was there was a big jump in a couple of days, like a huge jump in a matter of a couple of days, just intensely watching Kevin paint. Go, oh, that's how that works. Because composition.
It's just so interesting that isn't that how it kind of, for all of us who get thrown into the fire, that's kind of how we are always thrown into the fire. It's always like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. But I was so eager and, like young and eager and determined to, because I loved it so much. Failure wasn't an option, So it was just dive in and just have fun. And there was I didn't feel any stress like now.
We're going to have to definitely
commercial, anxiety attached to it at that point. There was just the last thing in my mind. It was just all fun. It was just a dream come true. And it was just learning. And I loved it. Just loved it.
Yeah. I mean, we'll definitely get to that because part of it also, you jumped into it, sort of not knowing the process of what a matte painting is. Yet we're sitting with you, and you have your oil painting in the background, which is pretty insane. And I'd love to, obviously to hear like how did that all, because you didn't know how to paint. I mean,
No.
it's not like you studied it. So
No.
I know I'm kind of derailing the whole
That's okay.
history of
Derail
Wayne,
away.
but I mean, it's just too interesting not to ask, because like, so where did that translate to painting?
Because I always wanted to be a traditional matte painter. That was the original dream.
The on glass stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And that never happened. Although I did have a chance. I did actually have an opportunity to do that once prior to working on Digital Domain. I just got the job at Digital Domain when I was at SIGGRAPH in '99. And after SIGGRAPH, I rented a car and I drove, all around the place, and I visited a whole bunch of studios. And one of them was Illusion Arts in Van Nuys to visit Sid Dutton.
Yeah.
All the other places I'd visited were all just office buildings with computers. And then I walk into Sid's place, and there's, motion control cameras and the matte painting set up on, stands and the lights. And I was like, wow, this is it. He offered me a job. He saw my portfolio and he said, well, if you ever get bored at that Digital Domain place, you've got a position here.
Really?
Yeah, it's my one regret. I never took him up on that. I was like, I could have worked with a real master, like really learned how to paint a long time ago. I would have been way better now. But it was like, I'd gotten the job and I didn't really know, how secure that offer was. And I sort of went with the Digital Domain one. And it turned out to be the Fifth Element. So
yeah, wow.
I'm not gonna complain about that.
Yeah,
and I worked with some awesome guys, some
of course
giants in the industry. So
yeah. No, I mean, you could be totally looking back now and go, man, I wish I worked on the Fifth Element. I mean, like it can always go either way, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's wow, that is really interesting. So how did the painting all come together? When did you actually start learning? I mean,
it was a bit of a reaction to your interview with Nicole last week was interesting, because you asked her about blacklist and so on. If there's a blacklist at Weta, I'm on it.
Oh no.
We can talk about that later if you want, but the painting was a sort of a reaction from me to get out from behind the computer and learn something that I wanted to do when I was younger. It was like, I just wanted to learn to paint. Photography was really just an avenue to get to that. And
so you wanted to learn how to paint before photography?
When I was a kid, I was drawing all the time, and I was trying to learn to paint in school, and teachers were terrible, so I never really learned how to paint, but that's what I wanted to do. I loved the science fiction paintings of, Chris Voss and John Harris and Jim Burns and all these guys from the 70s and 80s and all that book cover stuff. I loved it. And then one day it was year 10, this guy named Chris, I'll never forget his name, because this Chris comes in from another school, and the assignment was to illustrate your name in a material. So I wrote Wayne in big blocks of stone. One of the letters had fallen over, they were chipped and broken, there was pieces around the thing, there were cracks in it, all that kind of stuff, shaded in pencil. I was like, I was pretty happy with that. Chuffed. I'm ready to put it down and, impress the teacher or whatever. And then Chris puts his drawing down. So imagine this, piece of aluminium foil, scrunched up, unwrapped, with the word Chris scratched into that foil. And that's what he drew. I was like, oh no. I didn't think I could compete creatively. I thought the concept was awesome. And technically he pulled it off to a level I didn't think I can compete with. And that's when I made a decision to definitively stop drawing and take up photography. Because I thought, screw this drawing business. The camera gives me perspective for free. All I got to do is point the camera at the thing I want to shoot. That's it. It's easy. I don't have to worry about competing with this guy. That's probably my first regret, not the Sid Dutton thing. That'd be the second regret. The first regret is actually not sticking with that. So if any people
Well, I
out
mean,
there listening,
it's
don't stop.
it's really. I'm sorry, I have to cut you off here because otherwise I will totally forget. This is the one part where I just can't believe how similar what you're saying is to what happened to me.
Right.
But it was just because I couldn't draw this one Lamborghini and I just gave up. And I said, okay, photography is going to be the thing because, well, I can't draw. But I always wanted to draw, and I'm still learning to draw now.
Yeah, same, yeah.
Okay, so you had that really interesting story, and then you went into photography, and then the weather thing. You said that you got to get back out.
Right. So it was a thing of wanting to get out from behind the computer because when you're on these big films, it's 28 hours a day, 8 days a week, just. So at that time, I bought myself a Leica.
Nice.
And I was just out whatever chance I could get out at night and the weekends and just shoot street photography and that sort of stuff because I wanted to get back to just doing that. And secondly was to learn to paint because there was a art store directly across the road from where I was living in Wellington. I was like, it's about time I went down and bought some damn oil paints. So that was around about 2001. I just went.
So
down
did you know what to do with the paints?
Not really.
No.
No.
So you just kind of winged it. That was your goal. I'm just gonna wing it. I'm just gonna
Pretty
paint.
much. I mean, by then we had the internet, so I was learning and stuff and reading and so on and so forth. There was books and so on. So, I picked up a little bit along the way, and then that dropped off because once this whole thing blew up with Weta and I got out of there and I came to Sydney and I just was intensely working on TV commercials and stuff, and I got involved in being a co-founder and a partner of a business that was just disastrous. And then I went traveling for about 5 months just to get my head out of the film industry and out of advertising and just to reset the soul. I went to North India and the Himalayas and China, and I needed a reset button for the soul. Otherwise, I was going to kill myself. Not literally, but sometimes there were days you felt like that, I can tell you. But and so when I got back, I was like, no, actually, when I was there, I remember sitting, drinking a cup of tea, looking down this valley in the Himalayas, thinking, all this bullshit I'm dealing with back in Sydney, it's just that. It's nothing but bullshit. I've just got to get back and go back to the source of the things that gave me joy, and that was painting, and it's science fiction. Painting science fiction in oils, big. That's what I want to do. I just have to get back to doing that. And so 2004 was when I was traveling. That's when I started thinking of ideas and getting to that. But it wasn't until about 2008, I think I started to kind of get the painting side of things. And by about 2009, 2010, I started to produce the sort of work that I've got here. This one was done, it's 2015. So 2015, I think I did that one. So yeah, that was the original.
That's pretty amazing that, I mean, basically for self-taught, right? I mean, you were self-taught. And did you use any of the skills that you were picking up, say, at work, like doing matte painting? Did they transfer?
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. I
mean, there must have been guys at work that painted, right? I mean, that you could kind of...
Yeah, I mean, that probably stems all the way back from, Fifth Element and into Lord of the Rings. I mean, you probably know him. Damn, I just forgot his name. He's gonna kill me if I. There's that young French Canadian whippersnapper. What's his name? Damn it.
Matt Painter?
Yeah, Matt Painter, young guy. No, he's not young now, but he was at Weta. Damn it! Come on, son, to my tongue. He worked at ILM. He became like an senior art director at ILM. Jeez, it's just gone out of my head.
He's gonna get mad. We all don't know his name anymore. It's
Oh,
okay.
man.
We'll cut it in. We'll cut it in, and then you magically know who it is.
Yeah.
So he was this whiz. There was this young guy. He was a whiz. He was really, really good. And I just remember sitting there watching him paint. I was like, wow, he just seems to get it. Like it's connection from there straight to there, and
It's interesting because you going the other way, which is you started digital. And he says, screw it, go back to traditional, just for your own sanity, right? I mean, for your own enjoyment. Were you thinking of maybe making a career out of these oil paintings and being that person? Or was it just, I just want to do this for fun?
At first it was fun. At first it was just to do it because I wanted to do it. And then I thought, well, maybe I could do something with this. I started looking into possibility of exhibiting these and selling them. And that's when I discovered the show called IluxCon. It's like Spectrum. It's like one of these conventions, but it's only for traditional art, watercolors, inks, drawing, painting, that sort of thing. But it's all traditional and it's all physical art. And so I went to I've been to two. I exhibited at two. The first, both in Allentown in Pennsylvania, 2014 and 2015. So I sold a couple of paintings the first year, but I sold like one small one the second year. That was a disaster because it cost me a fortune to ship them over there and then get myself there and accommodation and all that kind of stuff. And it just cost, and then ship the paintings back because I couldn't leave them there. So it didn't really work out as well as I'd hoped because there was this big convention totally devoted to science fiction and fantasy artwork. And all these collectors would come through and just, buy what they liked. And I had some success the first year, but the second year, not so much. And I haven't really had much success with people contacting me about that ever since then either. So it just seems to be, I don't know, there's not a great desire for busted spaceships in the desert. You know what I mean? It's a niche of a niche of a niche of a niche.
But maybe I can ask a question here, kind of connected to that. I mean, since you are not like Australia is not really a hub for entertainment things, entertainment products and productions and that kind of stuff. I mean, once in a while you get something in your part of the world, like I don't know, like they shot part of the Matrix there, right? There was TV shows like Farscape. Then there's something down at Weta that they're doing, right? But it's not like Hollywood Dream Factory kind of thing, right? I mean, what's your take on Australia being I don't know, a place that maybe you feel like is not the ideal place for somebody to start out? Or do you feel like, I mean, I'm often of the opinion, for example, that, I mean, it's good to be away from all the noise to kind of get a bit of distance between yourself and what you do. But I don't know, what's your take on that? Is it?
If it wasn't for the Wolverine coming to Australia in 2012, I believe it was in Canada before that for a year or so. And I don't know why, but the production shifted from Canada to Australia. If it wasn't for that, I probably wouldn't be working as a concept artist today. For the very reason that the production designer or the production and the production designer were forced to hire local talent. In order to get that tax rebate, you have to hire local guys. Now, the production designer, Francois Audet, who I would swim through molten lava for, if you're watching, Francois, you know that. I love you, man. I love you. Seriously. I really would. He's one of these guys that totally gets it. It's never he's there and you're here. It's always that. But when he first hired me, he's like, "So do you have a passport? Do you have Australian citizenship?" I said, "Of course I have citizenship. Why wouldn't I?" And he says, "Oh, I thought you were an American." And I said, "Why is that?" And he said, "Well, your work is so good."
What are you doing here?
Yeah. And I said, "Well, okay, well, that's great. Thanks very much." So he hires me. Then he says, "Look, we can only hire you for about 2 weeks. Okay. It's just 2 weeks. That's all we've got." I said, and at the time I was like just about desperately broke. So I needed the job and I was like, "Fine, no problem. I don't care. It's okay. No worries." By the end of the first week, he's like, "So, are you available like past the 2 week period?" I said, "Yeah, man, it's okay. I'm cool. No worries." So before the end of the first week, he was like, thank God these guys actually know how to, paint and create this work. And the same thing happened on Alien Covenant. The production designer was exactly the same. He was just shitting bricks that we didn't know. These Australians, what are they going to do? What am I going to get from these guys,
That's another problem, yeah.
And there was myself, Evan Shippard, Gerhard Motzi, we were jammed in this little room for, I was on the job for 11 months total, but the three of us together was probably about 7 months thereabouts, you know. And he was so relieved. The Chris Seegers, the production designer, was so relieved to get the work that he was getting from us. He again, it was like, oh God, thank God.
So
Dodged a bullet.
Yeah,
because they just don't know. They just don't expect to see, you know, have concept artists down here that actually know what they're doing.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And they're forced to use us. So had Francois not been forced to use me, I would never have met him. He would never have met me, and I wouldn't have had the work that I've had with him over these last several years since then. It just wouldn't have happened at all. Because, you know, those guys have all got their own favorite artist and so on.
Of course. But yeah, if you're forced to, right, because of these reasons, that's true. I mean, do you feel like things are changing now? I mean, I don't know. It's like there once in a while there's like high profile big movies coming out of Australia. I mean, I guess Mad Max Fury Road was one of the bigger ones, but I mean, does that have any implications for the Australian film industry, or is it still meandering around? And
pretty much. Yeah, it's just little bits here and there, and the problem is the government here doesn't have a blanket policy on the rebate system. It's like they'll negotiate it per film, per production, and then the broader Hollywood system just says, "Wow, do we have to like go on and negotiate every time?" Because I think Canada probably has a certain set rebate. Other countries probably do as well, but no, not Australians. No, we're going to negotiate it with you per production. And it's going to vary. So of course the production's going to say, no, we need to know numbers. We need to be able to bank on a certain number ahead of time because, you know, and then South Africa says, well, we've got this blanket system, and they go, okay, we'll go there. And Australia misses out, or it happens to work in our favor for some reason, and then they bring it here.
Interesting.
So, yeah. So we get pretty much whatever film comes to the country, that's what we'll likely get to work on. And that's when we get to meet production designers, international designers, and then if with any luck, we get to work with them again further on.
Well, that's interesting, and I think my question is probably again the same one, which is, you know, you've gone from photography to matte painting, and that's like a complete new learning experience. Then you went from matte painting to painting, oil painting, and then now you're going to concept art, which is yet another completely different discipline, really. I mean, it's not about how well you paint. It's really, concept art is more design oriented. How was that transition? I mean,
terrifying.
I'm sure. Tell us more.
Well, I'm really good at. I think my brand of concept art is that cinematography slant. It's that view of what would this look like if the cinematographer was shooting it. The photographic aspect of a space or a place or whatever. Terrifies me designing architecture. Terrifies me designing vehicles. I don't do characters. But I've got a good eye for composition and what focal length to choose and where to place the camera and that sort of thing. And I get lucky with the rest, pretty much. You know, there's plenty of kit bash stuff out there for architecture and so on, and I can make stuff work. You know, there's bash enough stuff together, I can make it work. But I try to find that photographic viewpoint.
So is that more keyframe?
It's going back to that, kind of, I suppose. Yeah, maybe. I mean, I just came off Foundation, and they asked me to do this, design this spacecraft. The first season of Foundation, they had Paul Chattison designing all that, and I'm like, whoa! You asking me to design, and you just had him doing it, and you want me to? No. I said, no. I said, I can't fill those shoes. And they said, well, we don't have anybody else. I was like, oh shit. So it was like, really, really fast ramp up into improving my hard surface modeling skills just to get something, presentable, So,
but I mean, you're used to that because, I mean, the truth of it is, one thing that seems remarkable to me is the different careers and different disciplines that you'd had to pick up pretty quickly. there is there a common thread, and is there a special way that you learn these things, or is there any, or you just I'm just gonna put my head down and brute force it?
Well, there's always a bit of that. It's like learning to service my own car. You know what I mean? It's like, before I became an artist, I worked as an electronic technician for 6.5 years with the Department of Defense. And so during my apprenticeship schooling, one of my teachers, we're all dicking around on a bench, blowing capacitors up and transistors and this, that, and the other, and we're having fun, and skylarking about. And the teacher said, boys, he says, I know it's fun, and there's learning to be had blowing things up. Don't get me wrong. He says, but just remember, learn to learn. And we all stopped. It's like, that's cool. And then we sort of got into the work. And I never forgot that, ever. And I've never been afraid to dive into something that I don't know, like, doing a valve adjustment on an E46 M3, for example, which, for those who don't know, that's a pretty, delicate little job on a car and an engine. But you can learn this stuff. It's on YouTube. There's nothing you cannot learn today. Compared to what I saw as a kid, or what growing up. There was none of those sort of opportunities. But now, my God, there's no excuse.
But
to go dive into something that you've never done before.
But don't you think there's a danger of like overthinking things? Like you watch too many YouTube videos and you just end up watching YouTube videos without doing the work because you think like, this is so difficult. Because whereas before you were like, I'll just do it because I don't know how stupid it is to actually attempt doing it. I don't know.
Well, being a trained technician, I was I had an approach. I was trained to approach technical things like that in a certain way, and not be afraid of it, and to do the research required and get the right tools required and all that sort of thing. So I guess learning hard surface modeling or any of these sorts of things is just the same for me. It's just never been. It's just that pressure of I've got to do it now and I've got to do it as fast as I can. It's that's the anxiety part, is the pressure and the time constraints. You just wish we had time, because when you're in the thick of doing the job, you don't have that time. So when you get asked to do a certain thing that you need to learn, you're doing it on top of the job itself. And then they go like, where's that bloody, where's that painting? Where's that shot? Where's that design?
Do you then like consciously try to, like, let's say you have downtime between jobs, do you consciously go out and like say like, hey, I want to learn something new? Or are you just like, okay, I'm going to switch off and then whatever happens during the job, happens during the job, and I'll get to it then?
I try and switch off as best I can, if it's possible. But usually it's always ticking away.
Does switch off mean doing oil paintings and stuff like that? What do you do when you switch off?
Not for a while. Try and get out with my partner. We go out and go bushwalking. She's a photographer, and she does a lot of nighttime photography, and I'm holding lights and that sort of stuff. She does this real amazing, interesting sort of long exposure nighttime stuff. So we go out looking for landscapes. I'm also doing plein air.
Oh, nice.
Damn.
So I like doing that.
So painting.
Painting. Well, sort of. I haven't done much of that lately, but just to get out from behind the box, see real life, breathe fresh air, get some sunshine, all that sort of thing, which I don't get enough.
There's life behind the.
Hey, it's Australia, okay? There's more than anything anywhere in the world, right? Yeah. You probably have the best backyard in the world, so to speak, to get out and experience.
Yeah, but everything in Australia wants to kill you.
No, it's true. That's why you wear boots and socks and everything.
No, it's true. When you're walking around the bush, I mean, the weird thing is, my partner and I always talk about this. We're always worrying about, like, when we go, we carry a snake bite first aid kit, just in case. But we've never seen a snake.
Oh,
yeah.
Because of the first aid kit. It's not worth it.
Usually we make a bit of racket walking through the bush, so they're probably well aware, and they're just like getting out of there. The snakes usually just don't want to be around humans anyway, so. And then, strangely enough, she saw one in the backyard of her sister's place on the coast, and it was like right there, right in the grass. I was like, wow, we've never seen one in the bush, but you see one in the backyard on the coast.
Where do you live?
I live in Sydney. Yeah,
Sydney.
Yeah. So it's just a city, just like every other city.
Yeah.
There's a couple of nice places. But...
So I was wondering when you talking about the, you were doing like a ship design that, you obviously didn't think you were like the best person for the job, at that moment because of, some other people were on it, and I guess you've really liked their work. How did you, how did you just say, okay, this is what I have to do now? So what did you do? Did you like just like kind of like to Jan, what Jan was saying? Did you just go like look up a whole bunch of like ship designs, or did you, like what
This
do you do?
particular one, they'd already given me just a very crude version, a very, very crude shaped model of that. So I had that to go on. So it wasn't blue skying this design. So that was okay. That was, at least I had that jumping off point. But it was, again, it was very crude. So how do you just, good quality hard surface modeling, which I was not into. I hadn't been in that area. So, and it was just a lot of YouTube videos very late into the night, working out, shit, how do I do this with Maya? How do I do this with Maya? Should I do Blender? Maybe I'll go watch one of Jan's tutorials. God. No,
Because
I know Maya already. I know enough of Maya. I'll just use that. I'll just have to stick with that. And then I just found guys that were doing it with Maya, and I just went from there.
Because of the nature of your work, which is tighter, so you were doing like putting that ship into keyframes and stuff like that, and
No, I suspect they just got sick of this process of being dragged out. They may not have, but I suspect it was taking longer than they wanted. And I told them that in the beginning. I said, look, this is not my sphere. It's not my wheelhouse. I said, so don't expect this to happen overnight. I said, I'm going to have to learn some new skills here just to get this going for you guys. And they're like, it's okay. It's okay. And you hear that, but then the reality is that it's not okay because they need it, within a certain time frame. And that's understandable. So I suspect they just took it and then maybe gave it to somebody else to incorporate into whatever shot. So, but it was good because the next shot I got was taking a spacecraft that they had already designed, but I needed to modify that. They built most of the miniatures, most of the spacecraft, or all of them, I think, as miniatures. So that's a cool thing about Foundation, is that they've reverted to miniatures. They model them, 3D print them in pieces, and they built them as these miniatures. So that's really cool. Anyway, so I had to modify the model. So learning all that hard surface stuff that I did before, I could now adapt this second one for my purposes of getting into a shot, all that sort of stuff. So it's, nothing learned is a burden, particularly not in this industry.
Yeah, nowadays, are you doing a mixture of paint and 3D and rendering, or are you doing just more rendering and less paint?
It's definitely a mix of both. I start off in 3D, and what I used to do was probably just have a grayscale model of whatever the scene was, bash together some stuff. I'd get a general light direction, and I'd spend ages getting the camera right. That was the thing I spent a lot of time on, just getting that composition. What focal length do I want? Where's the camera? And I'd spend ages just perfecting that. And then once I had that, I just render out a few different layers, and then I just paint everything on top of that grayscale base. Start with the sky, build it up, away you go.
Yeah, it's all the stuff you've learned. It's kind of all coming together. It's like the photography, the painting. You could paint it from scratch in Photoshop if you needed to, but obviously, and then now the concept design part of it, you put it all together. It's like,
well, one of the things that I've discovered that I quite enjoy doing with the concept art side, I guess this is one of the things, and I don't know whether you guys ever do this or not, is getting correct scale with figures, camera placement, height off the ground, any of those sorts of things, sort of the real world cinematography aspect of that concept art.
Definitely.
And I say that because one of the opening scene of Alien Covenant in that room, that big white room, that was all built to scale. The figures I had in there, the Steinway piano, the chairs, everything was scaled. The Statue of David is the exact height and all that sort of stuff. And so when I did that, the set designers took that 3D model, turned that into a CAD drawing. They built that as the set. And on the day of that shoot, there was an X on the floor, the studio floor, right where my 3D camera was supposed to be. And my concept art was painted or stuck to the floor. And so Ridley Scott set up his camera exactly in that position with the same lens that I'd established for that shot.
That proves that
so
it's
he
so
was
important.
he was a big, he was a big proponent of that. He loved all that stuff. You know, that was what he saw as the concept art was it. That was absolutely, you know, he will when he said that was done, it's because he knew exactly that's what he was going to do. Whereas, you know, other directors are like, just get it in a ballpark and I'll, you know, fudge it on the day. But he was very precise.
I think a lot of people are not aware that. I mean, I don't have that not aware, but I would say that a lot of film concept art. I mean, film in particular. You have to actually be very, very knowledgeable, or at least have a good idea of photography, film, and, you know, camera back, cinema, focal lengths, and all that kind of stuff. Because ultimately, I think that's what directors respond to the most, because it needs to feel like film, and it's not just in the photoreal aspect of it. It's how you use the camera, and I think a lot of people, because they come from painting. So they don't really understand that, you know, like focal length. I mean, because if you ask them, they would be like, I don't know. You know, I don't know what focal length this is. I mean, it's a warped image.
Default camera.
Yeah, I mean, or they don't even use 3D. They'll just draw it, right? I mean, it just depends. But I think it's interesting, because I looked at your Covenant stuff that you posted on Twitter, and it's just amazing. I mean, I love it. And it's just seamless. So that's what directors like to see too, you know, like a good shot, and they can't be taken out of that moment too much. So, I mean, I don't know. I think all your skills just kind of culminated to make that perfect, you know, like concept artist for film. I mean, that's, to me, there's no better skill, you know, like the skills you have are perfect for that.
Well, right. And I guess that's where I love doing that sort of stuff. And I don't call myself a designer, because I don't design stuff. Usually I get given set designs from the set designers, or vehicles from someone else, or spacecraft, and I'll just put it all together. But it's that cinematography side that I love piecing together. And I mean, I got asked by the cinematographer on Ghostbusters Afterlife through Francois. He said, hey, listen, this one's not for me, but this is for the DP. He wants you to kind of lay out a shot of this farm, because he'd seen the work that I was doing. And Francois and I had worked on several projects, so he kind of knew my background and he knew my photography bent. Because I'd say things like, he might say, I don't know, make that, why is that so bright? Can you make it darker? I'd say, well, no, that's called luminance range, mate. I said, that's exposure. We're indoors. You're looking outdoors. So, you know, if you're lighting indoors, guess what's going to be brighter outdoors? That sort of thing, you know. It's just understanding of how film will work or exposure will work. And he would always go, yeah, that's right. I forgot you're a photography guy. So it was really cool that through him, the DP asked me to do a piece for this farm, because they were shooting kids on that film. So they've got a real farm they built on location, and they rebuilt the farm on stage so they could film the kids all day long, you know. And he just wanted to get an idea of what the lighting on that farm should be, and that environment, before they committed to building the farm on set. So that was kind of cool, you know, to have a DP say, hey, can you get him to do this for me, you know?
So looking back at sort of this, I mean, this long career that you've had, I mean, is there one project that you go, oh, that's pivotal, or your favorite, or anything like that?
Well, that'd be The Fifth Element.
Yeah, I imagined.
Sure.
God, the Fifth Element, man. Yeah.
The Wolverine, because I met Francois, and that's been a great. I kind of see that as being one of those. I've read about, you know, you read these books about film guys or a visual effects person, and you know, so and so worked with so and so for many years, and they worked on all these productions together, and there's this sort of relationship that kind of develops. And I never really had that with anybody in the film industry until I met Francois. Not that we've worked on a ton of things, but we've worked on several things. And he's been this guy that's been there in the last several years, that things pop in and out. And, you know, I kind of really respect the dude, and I respect what he works on, and I respect his artistic, you know, visions and what he does. And that's been nice to have that over the last several years, or since 2012, is developing a relationship with a designer that you can always come back to one day. You know, every now and again, meet up again and you work on another project, and it becomes the working with the people, less so the project,
No,
It's like
totally get that.
If it wasn't, I don't care if I don't ever work on Star Wars, but I really care about working with, say Francois or something like that. So that's you get to my age, you just want a really good experience, and you just want somebody who respects what you do and they understand your process, and you've got a shorthand, and you don't have to explain yourself over and over again, and all that sort of stuff is pretty seamless, and you just enjoy it. You get back to that enjoyment thing of working that way. And if you're late for some reason, he's not going to, bag you out, and you probably know there's a good reason for it, and vice versa.
There's trust. There's trust there.
Yeah. It's a personal and creative trust. Absolutely. Yeah, it's valuable.
So,
it's like.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. So what's next for you?
What's next? Well, more of the same, really. I don't know whether the NFT thing will ever take off. For me personally, I don't know. I haven't sold anything yet, so I no clue if that will free me from the film industry, and I don't mean that in a bad way. But there was that promise of the golden land of opportunity and adventure. The NFT colonies sort of quote that I said. There was always that. As an artist, you always want that. Is that promise of, if someone could give you a shit ton of money, you could just paint all day long. You could just create your stuff all day, shoot, paint, whatever it is you think you want to do, and just be left to do that, and people would buy that artwork. That's always the dream, someone to allow that to happen. The reality is, who knows? I think people bought into the NFT thing because of that promise, and I think that was very short-lived. So the reality is, I don't know. So for me, the reality is, wait till the next film job comes through, keep painting, get outside, do some more landscape painting. That's it, really. There's nothing momentous, put it that way, on the horizon. Just more of the same, and just get better at what I do. And as I think I said in one of the comments on one of your early shows, the whole NFT thing has lit a bit of a fire under my backside to get back into painting and think about more paintings and get that creative juices going. So that's been good.
Yeah, I think that's what, well, at least for me, I know that's what NFTs has been really good in that sense. I mean, money making or not, I think it's gotten me to, sort of start thinking artistically, using my own voice to speak and to say something. And for, a lot of people who have sort of, slowed down their own personal work, maybe it's time to pick it back up. Collaborate with other people, whatever that might be. I think it's been positive in that sense. And obviously everybody has a different payout, of whatever they, whenever they got into it on whatever platform, and whether they were lucky or not. And it just, and it's not to say that NFTs is dead. It's just that I think it's slowed down a lot. Right now.
I've read a lot of stuff from some of the collectors talking about, they think the artist should start off with less or reduce their prices and not mint so often, and so on and so forth. And it's kind of like, you guys started this, we didn't. You guys threw all this money into the pit in the first place. So what do you expect us to do? Because as there's always that. It's that mirage. It's that damn mirage on the horizon. You think there's artistic freedom right over there. If I could just reach out and grab it, And every artist has that.
And that mirage is certainly there. But I don't know. I think it's one of these things where, for me now, I look back and I think, well, as long as it's gotten me to get past a certain hurdle, to express myself more, I think that's already reward in itself. Because I really would have just kept job after job after job after job, and now I'm like, well, maybe I should take a break and really just kind of slow down a little bit, and think about what I want to do. Because I'm not young either. I'm getting up there and I don't have, many years of energy, like I want to use these prime years to do something that I can look back and say, well, that's something that I really wanted to do, and when you're working on the film, ultimately, you're still doing someone else's vision. That's me. Is that something that you think, wow, you would also like to do something that's just sort of purely your own? Are you working on any stories or, I mean, anything?
Well, I've got this sort of loose story attached to these paintings. One of the original ideas I had was to publish these as a large format book, and there might be short stories in there or a, say, novella length story. Whether I would write it or someone else, I don't know. But my original idea was a story about an artist who lived wherever that is 500 years ago. And so you're reading about an artist's life and the paintings that they painted during their lifetime, during some event, perhaps. I'm not sure what that might be, but some kind of thing, some historical event, something significant in that person's life. And that you, as the reader of this book, you're reading the past. You're reading about that artist's life a long time ago and what they painted. And so that was some idea I had of what I might do with these paintings, is just a nice, big, fat book that people can just pour over and dive into and just, lap up. And just much like I don't have them handy, but you look at those Ralph McQuarrie Star Wars books, that's not a very different type of book, but man, you can just it's a big book and you can pour over those drawings forever and ever. It's just beautiful work. It's that sort of thing, I mean, I love Star Wars and I love the film industry, but some of my earliest memories of science fiction art were books and book covers, Chris Voss and all those guys. And so I love that. There's something about just sitting down with a big book and looking at these pictures and just immersing yourself in that, But I have to paint hundreds. I have to paint hundreds of paintings just to fill a book. So,
or not. I mean, that you don't have to. No. I mean, I think it's just whatever rocks your boat, or it could just be like big paintings you're painting now, and finding joy in doing that, because I think it's pretty. When I looked at because you obviously scanned it in, and I saw it on your Twitter, and I think it's a really unique look. I think that's quite interesting, when you're actually painting something sci-fi, because that is kind of gone now. I mean, it's all kind of 3D. I'm guilty of that because that's how I know how to do a lot of these things. But that's why I think what you do has a unique kind of look to it, because it's done traditionally. I mean, especially your oil painting. So that actually grabbed my attention, and I thought it was really cool. I love seeing the setting of sci-fi in like an oil painting, a proper one, and not just a Photoshop painting, because you can tell when it's Photoshop painted.
Yeah, of course.
But I love it, so I would definitely want to see more.
The materials and the brush and feeling it, and there's no undo button. There's no safety net necessarily, except for a scraper or a bit of sandpaper if you make a mistake, but just the physicality of doing it as well. There's smells of the paint and the linseed and whatnot, and you're standing up. You're not in front of a computer. You're not bombarded by this light source all day long, and it's nice. It's really nice. It's fun,
How long does it take you to paint one, like say the one behind you? How long what's
this one? This is somewhat based on a digital painting I did for a film job that never happened. So there was that painting started life as a photograph I took in New Zealand, a landscape shot. And that sort of evolved and morphed, and then I put this craft in there. So I kind of had the composition pretty much figured out way ahead of time. I just knew I wanted to do something with it, and I wasn't quite sure what. And then one day I just started drawing into this painting. I was like, yeah, I think this is, yeah. And the painting itself came together within about, I think, 2 weeks or, a week and a half. One of the big paintings that I've done is that Sky Burial 2 painting. That was probably about 6 months, 8 months, maybe 10 months from memory somewhere. It was started off with a reverse composition. I wasn't happy with the painting. It wasn't happening at all. And I scraped off and I paint again. And then it was like, I took a picture of it.
You can't flip the canvas.
Exactly. You can't flip the canvas. Exactly. So I took a photo of it, took that into Photoshop, and I worked it, and I just kept going until I got a hook. I knitted that hook into the thing that I could see and go, that's it right there. Got that bit, and that'll inform the rest. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to flip the composition. I'm going to paint it bigger. So I started that completely from scratch and did it all over again. And so that whole process is, say like 10 months. But that's obviously between work and jobs and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it was around about 2008 that I seriously dived into the oil painting stuff. The GFC hit. I was out of work. I had no film work here. And that lasted for quite a while. The global financial crash, 2008. Okay. So that really screwed me up. But I had time on my hands. So that's when I thought, right, start building a studio in my apartment bedroom and just get into it,
So these days you're pretty much so you have some relationships with some PDs and whatnot, but is it mostly that you just work remotely for productions out of the UK or US, or are you often attached to
whoever calls?
Okay.
Yeah,
exactly. Whoever calls.
Yeah. Most of my work is from, say, Francois or designers overseas, but not. If Francois drops dead, I'll go broke. Put it that way. If the designer I worked with on Foundation, if he drops dead, I'll probably definitely go broke. So there's two designers I've done a lot of work for in the last few years, and that's about it. But I don't get too many calls. It's not my phone's not ringing off the hook down here. So
yeah, no, I know that feeling. I mean, in Singapore, there's also nothing, right? There's really absolutely nothing. There's not even like there are sometimes productions coming here, like part of Westworld season 3 was shot here. Then some abysmal movies like The Hitman or whatever, right? They're suddenly here for whatever reason, or Crazy Rich Asians, but they don't need concept art. But there's not even like any need to hire locals or anything. So we're just like completely at the liberty of US, UK productions, and we're in a different time zone and remote. And as much as that doesn't matter so much anymore in a post-COVID world, it still is a factor, right? So there are always these clients that we have that kind of make or break a year for us financially, right? So it's not like, hey, we're in a union and like our phone's off the hook, like ringing non-stop. It's not like that at all. And that's, I also take, like, I can't rely on the film industry. It's impossible, right? It's going to be games, commercials, all sorts of other stuff that we need to do, right? Podcasts and tutorials and whatever, NFTs, right? We'll take everything we can get our hands on.
Yeah,
so that's what it is, right? But like Emmanuel already asked, right? Like, do you develop stories, or like, are you because you have not reinvented, but you have evolved kind of again and again out of like the photography and then painting, matte painting, concept art, like, but it seems like it's kind of like. It's not like, oh, I want to do this right now, and then you just make everything happen in order to get there, right? It was more a reaction towards your environment, right, in terms of how things evolved. But so it's interesting. Yeah, pretty much. It will be interesting to see what's next, because I think it's impossible for us to know what will come next, right? It's really interesting, but you never know, right? You never know. Maybe there's a Mad Max sequel in the works, right? And they're gonna probably do part of it in Australia as well, I guess. But let's see what happens.
That's the weird thing about my career. I've rarely contacted by people in the industry here. Despite working on Farscape, the TV series, which was done here in Sydney back in 98, 99, so like a year and a half that company eventually went out of business. And across the road was Animalogic at the time, before they were at the Fox Studios lot where they are now. So it was just a much smaller company. So they like knew of my existence. So from 1999, it took 10 years before I got asked to do a job at Animalogic.
Crazy. And so
10 years.
Yeah,
I'm in the same city.
But you might
and that was only under sufferance.
You might as well be a whole world away, right? So
right, yeah. So it's really strange how that works.
So in terms of like, if you have like aspiring Australian concept artists, like what would be the thing you would tell them? Like what would you recommend them to do?
I teach as well. I teach color and light at a small school here in Sydney because, it's that extra funding and extra money. So, and I tell my students, just if you can, get out, go to America, go international. If you really want to do it, if you're really that hardcore about it, that's what you have to do.
You want to have a career, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I did. I went through Cinefex.
Yeah. Do you think being geographically in a place is important more, or is that why?
If you're younger, I think if you're younger, you can go to those hotspots. Had I stayed in the US and stayed at Digital Domain, who knows where I would have been now? It was definitely that place. I mean, God, Digital Domain, it was just the Interview with the Vampire, Apollo 13, True Lies, Fifth Element, Titanic. I mean, we're talking some of the biggest films that have ever been made. It was the hotspot of that stuff around that time. I may have bounced into other companies, but it's definitely where it happens. It doesn't happen in Sydney. They bring productions here occasionally, and it's only because we have Fox Studios here, and that was the only reason I think they bring stuff to this country. And then rebates, of course. They did Star Wars, the prequels here, the first 3 prequels in at Fox Studios. I never got a phone call. I didn't even know that was being made here.
That's an interesting thing. Yeah, I mean,
it's weird.
You would assume in a small industry, everybody would know each other, but it still doesn't quite work that way, right? No. There's no guarantees in that regard. Definitely not. So, but yeah, as far as young people are concerned, I'd say just if you're in Australia or a smaller country, you can get to the US, Canada maybe. I don't know whether that's I've never worked in games, so maybe Canada is the hotspot for games, if that's where you want to go. There's a lot being made, yeah.
But if you're young and you're mobile and you can get out and do that stuff, for sure, absolutely. If you're not tied down by family or anything, go for it, for sure. If you're in Australia...
What if you're not mobile or it's not a reality to leave where you're coming from?
Then I think it's easier today than it certainly was in my time. Because now you've got ArtStation, you've got online portfolios. It's pretty easy if you're good enough, if your work is standout enough, people will eventually see it. And if you're on Twitter, put NFTs aside just for a second. A lot of the marketing stuff that they're teaching us, the collectors are talking about and telling artists, you should be doing that for the film industry anyway, if that's what you want to get into. It's the same stuff. It's the same applies. So get out there, talk to production designers, get your work out, art directors and so on and so forth. So I think it's easier today because we've got this online system. People are used to it. We've laid the path for that. It's not as hard. You don't have to go. But if you can go, that means they get to hang out with guys like, their peers in the same city, and they can go do things, and you develop networks and you become friends, and friends recommend other friends for jobs and so on. And it's a flow-on effect.
Yeah, it's funny because nowadays you almost don't know what city to pick because it's not necessarily LA anymore. It's it's all over those. It could be Atlanta. It could be Canada because they're shooting a lot in Vancouver. It could be England. I mean, it could be anywhere. So it's kind of like it used to be just LA. Now it's like not quite sure where I'm gonna go.
Well, that's a good point. So then maybe it has diluted quite a lot around the world now because of that.
But I mean,
and maybe because people can work remote, so it's.
But I think
if we take
anything, just to kind of wrap up to wrap up our episode here, I think that one of the main things that we've learned from hearing your stories is that, I mean, yes, there's some, like, there can be a benefit to being in a hub, but I think it's more about being at the right place at the right time and having a bit of luck and perseverance, right? Like you said, like you went out of your way to SIGGRAPH around the world, right? It's really far from Melbourne, Sydney to LA. It's really freaking far, and you've put yourself out there, and then you got the opportunity at Digital Domain, right? And then it kind of almost fell apart, but then you saw the Incal, right? And then so you took the opportunity, and then you learned on the job, which is really hard, to make things work. And then you persevered like the 10 years between after Farscape, right? So it's like, if anything, it's about stamina, and it's about that tiny bit of luck. But I think you can make things work anywhere you are. And I mean, even though you are in LA, it's not like you can just like sit back and great things will happen to you, right? You still need to work hard and bide your time and wait for that little opportunity, right? Because I mean, if you're in a hub, it also means everybody else is there, and the competition is a lot harder, right? Whereas if you're in Australia right now, maybe it's worth to like pop by and learn from Wayne at a school and get some, like, ask him about all the great things he's done, I think.
My students are usually asleep.
Oh, how dare they? How dare they? That's not nice to hear. But anyway, I mean, Emmanuel, do you have any last question to ask?
Not really a question. I mean, it's more of I just hope that people really understand, I mean, part of what you're saying also, Jan, is what Wayne has been through. I mean, it's very downplayed, and you're very humble about your, what you've done. But I also think that it takes a certain kind of person to be able to be, thrown into these situations, learn, and have the self-confidence to say, hey, I can do this, but it's going to take a certain amount of learning and to learn it, and then to do it, and to have done it with so many different kinds of skills. I think I just want people to really have a think about that, because it's very doable for anybody who believes in themselves. Were you going to say something?
If I can do it, trust me, anybody can do it.
Come on.
I was No, seriously, I'm this shit.
There's the
from the
humbleness.
from the working suburbs of Melbourne, and the idea that I could get from that place, from what I saw as this unreachable goal, and just work at doing it, just because I had no choice. I felt I had no choice. I just had to do it, and if I can do it, anybody could do it, really.
Well, I'm not so sure about that, but I mean, I believe that if you put your mind to it, a lot of people, you can achieve what you want, but that's downplaying all the hard work that you've put in.
Oh, right. I mean, that's like I go back to, the electronics thing, and the teacher telling us, boys learn to learn, and also going through an apprenticeship schooling and learning a whole trade, and learning to fail, and learning to learn and learn complex things. And I hated, I didn't hate electronics, but I really didn't want to be doing that job. It's because my parents pressured me into getting an apprenticeship, and I was like, oh God, no. The first day on that job, I'm like, 4 years. It was like a prison sentence. They're literally going through these gates, I'm like, oh God. So they give me this little tour of this area that I'm going to be working in. And what do I discover? There's a dark room in the facility. I'm like, why is there a dark room in here? And the guy's like, well, we design and print our own printed circuit boards, and we do photographic scaling and reproduction of the printed circuit board designs. We use litho film. I'm like, litho film? You've got litho film? And that was it. My whole attitude changed about that place. By the time I finished there, 6.5 years later, I controlled and ran the entire darkroom, and I was just ordering in materials and, photographic paper, and I printed my entire folio in there, and it was awesome.
But it takes energy and dedication to turn such a opportunity into something positive. Not everybody can do that. A lot of people would just say like, okay, I'll just do my job 9 to 5 and then get out, right? It takes quite some
don't get me wrong. There were moments I hated that place, and I hated it with a fiery passion, and I didn't want to be there. And I was probably a real pain in the ass to a lot of the guys I worked with. But it's the greatest gift I've ever had was working in that factory. Nothing in art has given me what I got from that place. Nothing. Everything that's of real value I got from working in that factory. Working with a group of guys, learning things that were complex and hard and I didn't get and I didn't like doing, but I was forced to, which is why I tell my students, if you've got to paint something that's a subject matter you don't like, learn to fall in love with some part of it. You've got to learn to fall in love with the painting, because if you don't, it's a chore. And if it's a chore, you're just not going to do it very well. You're not going to do it at all. You're not going to do it very well. But if you can find some component or some part of that painting to fall in love with, it's much easier. For me, I'll paint anything. It's about the light.
Yeah, I mean,
so I don't care what it is. I really don't. Just light and composition, and I'm like, I'm there. It's fine. No drama.
I can't agree with that more, because even if I'm on the worst show, I'll say, well, okay, I'll learn to paint this better, or that better, because you have to find something positive in the thing that you're in, or you might as well not be there. But I really love that. Learn to learn. It's a great one, because I think for a lot of people, just those three words can, you can't really ring a bell. So yeah, I think that's a really, really.
And it involves and includes in that little package, it includes a lot of failure. You just have to understand that the failure is part of the process of learning. So
if you don't fail, then you're doing something wrong. Like you have to fail. I mean,
yeah. I've done a lot of that.
We all have.
Awesome. I think that's a great place to wrap up this episode. So thanks again, Wayne, for your time and your insight. And to our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. We'll put links to Wayne's social media profiles and portfolio in the description below. And as usual, if you enjoyed this episode, please like, comment, and subscribe. And thank you so much for watching, and see you guys in the next one. Bye.